Hey all, second video of the transit seat install. We've got to finish this up, get the floor prepped, get the seats in so we can button up this project. Let's get going. So what you saw me do there is I hammered down the edges of the two floor grooves where the transit seat sits so that it could sit a little flatter because it's a little wider than the groove. And then I drilled the 4 holes for it. What I did was pre-drilled from the top with a very small drill bit that was barely deep enough to go through so that I could then crawl underneath and make sure that I wasn't about to punch a hole through a fuel line or something like that. And then went in from the underside and drilled the holes big enough for the 1/2-inch bolts that I'm using. And then came back up on top, painted and treated those, and then I taped some cups of metal over them just so that I wouldn't step in the paint while I was doing the next part, which was grinding off the paint at each of the bolt holes for the old seats, and then cutting little coins of metal and welding those on top. I've got those 4 in that corner done. I've got those 4 there, the 4 over here, and the 4 over here done. There's 2 on the wheel well that held the seat belt. So the next thing is I need to make some plates for underneath. The original seats were installed with these sort of cup things, which are probably strong enough, but these were designed or intended for holding a single seat with a single person in it. I'm putting in a double seat, so I'm going to make some thicker ones or bigger ones, or something that is a little stronger than this, just for my own peace of mind. So what I've got to do right now is climb underneath the van and see what kind of space I have relative to the holes I drilled. All right, so I'm under the van now. I'm using my headset, my headband light, so hopefully this will give you guys enough light. So this is relative to the front of the van. This is the front left hole of it, and I can make my plate a maximum of 3.5 inches from the center line to the edge and still fit in there. The rear hole on this side is probably going to be about the same. And if I do make it 3.5 inches, it'll overlap the rail here, which will give it a little bit of additional strength. So that's appealing. And then the holes for the other side. There's one. I've got plenty of space all around. This one I have plenty of space all around. There's something lying on top of it, but 2 3/4 going forward is the maximum that I have there. I'm doing all these measurements from the center of the hole, and then there is my last hole, similar 2 3/4. And that'll overlap this rail. Unfortunately, this front one won't overlap at anything because of the direction the rail is. But the rear holes are the ones I'm worried about more than the front ones, because the rear, in a front impact, the rears will pull out and take a much bigger force. The odds of being rear-ended with that same force isn't as big. Plus also, in the unlikely event that the fronts tear out, you're still kind of okay because you'll fall backwards with the seat rather than have the seat crush you or pin you or let you hit the seat in front of you. So I need to make 2 plates that have at least one dimension that's less than 2, that's approximately 2 3/4, so that I can do the rear ones, or that side, and I need to make two plates that have one dimension. That I need to make two plates that have one dimension that is 3.5 inches to make this size. So I think the time has come to do that. Now that we're under here, these are the old seat mounts. You can see the coins that I welded into them. These need paint and seam sealer and undercoating still, but unfortunately right at this moment it's way too cold to do any of that. The paint probably will not cure properly because it's sub-freezing. So unfortunately I'm going to have to sort of hold off on that for a little bit. Alright, dug through my various bits. I lucked into this piece of 1/4-inch steel that I have no idea where it came from. But this is the right length that I can go 3.5 inches to there and then cut it another 1.5 inches after that. 3.5 inches to there, cut it another 1.5 inches after that. 2 3/4 inch to there, cut it another 1.25 inches after that. Same thing over here, and get 4 plates, each of which are the sizes that I need. This one over here, I'm probably gonna leave this extra on it because there's no reason to cut that off, and then this can be my that front plate for that one hole that doesn't have something it overlaps, so just give that a little more size. So what I'm going to do with these is take this over to the drill press, give myself the necessary size holes in each location, and then cut this and round the corners. If you're making a plate like this that's just going to float underneath the vehicle, in my opinion, I'm not a professional, but in my opinion, it should have at least some rounding to the corners so that the sharp corner, if it's trying to, under that force of impact, trying to tear through that floor, that sharp point doesn't give it a high stress point to give it a better chance of punching through the floor. I'm also going to weld the nuts in place, but very slightly. What I'm going to do is basically set the nut in place and tack 2 sides of it just so it stays on the plate while I'm under there setting up. I may put a washer, tack that in place, and then put the nut on and tack that in place for just extra levels of paranoia. But those welds are not going to be intended to hold the nut while it's being tightened down. I'm going to be under there with a wrench. That's just intended to keep the nut in place so that I'm not under there trying to feed hardware on there and hold it in place and whatnot while I'm trying to hold these heavy plates up there. So the plates are built. I've got the seat rails cut down and modified to exactly the length I need them to be. I cut them here specifically because that's a reinforcement welded in, so there's no reason to have the material past that. But I discovered something that I hadn't even thought about because I was just like, oh, there's holes for bolts. And even didn't give it any thought whatsoever, except here's my 1/2-inch bolts that I'm using, grade 8. It's just barely bigger than this hole. This hole that I wasn't planning on using, but I'm now pondering, it's just barely bigger than. And then this hole drops straight through. And I got myself in the position where I was like, okay, well, I'll make some plates for the top so that they'll fit properly. And then I'll do it that way. And then I made myself stop. I made myself back up. I talked it over with my partner so that I could have somebody listening, so I had to explain it in very, very clear detail. And I did some research, and the original bolts had a square plate with a hole that floated in here. I don't know exactly if that's the same thing here, but I assume it was the same thing here because there's no indication from what I can find of a different style of nut here. So I'm pausing on this for tonight. I'm going to go swing by the Ford dealer probably tomorrow or this weekend and see if I can get those plates that they had here, because I just feel like I'll feel good if I have the Ford ones there. And then same with here. And then if I can't get those, if they won't sell them to me, or if they're some sort of insane price or whatever, then I'll go get some more plate steel and make my own. But I'd rather get the specific Ford ones first if I can, because I just know that that's what they're designed for. And then go forward from there. It means I'm not going to get these in tonight, but I'd rather do it right and safely. I could, with these, probably just use washers and they'd be fine, because the bolt, there's so little place for the head can't pull through. So with a washer distributing the load a little bit more, it'd be totally fine. But this front one, the washer would be barely contacting, so that wouldn't be safe. And if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it right. So this is on pause for tonight. I'm going to get those plates or get some metal to make some if I can't get them. And I'm going to pick this back up. All right. So I was talking about going to the Ford dealership to see if I can get the washers for these. That's not a possibility. Ford does not list the washers separately. You can buy the bolts, but there's not a listing. There's not a mention of the washers. You can buy the bolts and the rails. So the assumption I and the parts guy came to is that the washers must just be included with the rails. They're not a separately serviceable part. So instead, what I tracked down was a piece of 1/4 inch, which is the same as the braces I built for the other side, by 1.5. If you need washers for one of these, this is the stuff you want. You want 1/4 inch by 1.5 inch wide bar stock, because 1.5 inch sits exactly in this channel. It's absolutely perfect. There's no wiggle room. So that does that perfectly. So what I cut was, I started with this one, which is 1.5 by 1.5 more or less. And I actually cut the same for over here, but I had to trim it down because I modified this rail so it was sticking out a bit. So I just trimmed it so that it can sit behind this edge here. And then for over here, because the hole is bigger and because I've got plenty of space for it, I cut this one as 2 inches by 1.5 to fit into this space well. So the way I'm going to do this now is, this is going to go into the van. I'm going to bolt down the front, I'm going to bolt down the rear, and then the center one, I'm going to use this to line up and drill the hole so that the hole is centered, because I'll have a little fudge room for the front and the back, but once this is in place, I won't have any fudge room for this one because I only have adjustment in this plane. I don't have any adjustment in this plane because these exactly fit. So what I'm going to do is literally line this up and run the drill bit straight through it to drill that hole, slide it out of the way, seal up the hole with paint, slide it back, bolt it down. I haven't made plates for these center ones, so those are going to get bolted down later anyway. But yeah, that solves my bolt problem. This one only slides forward back, but this one I have a little bit of movement in all directions, so I can account for imperfections in the way I drilled the holes by just moving this one around and moving the other one forward and back. So that's how I'm doing that. And the seat is in. I didn't film the actual bolt down because it's 7 degrees out, so I wanted to just get it done. I used my washers that I made, the square ones. I ended up having to drill the hole out. I had drilled them out to 1/2 inch, but this 1/2 inch bolt has a shoulder at the top where there's no threads, so I had to drill it one size out larger. But this goes through into that plate that you saw me make. Same thing in the rear. I haven't put the center one in yet, but what I'm basically going to do is use this washer to drill the hole to put that in. The only reason I haven't drilled it is I can't put the paint on it because it's so cold, but that's going to be going in. The seat is already super solid with just those 2 bolts, but I will be getting that one in for full belt and suspenders. It fits well. It's nice and solid. It's easy to take out now. I'm going to show you that in a second. And yeah, it's down inside the ribs to give you maximum depth. I'm putting sound deadener down into the ribs before I cover the floor, but I didn't put any there just to gain me that little, couple of millimeters. Now that the seat is bolted down, it's easy to show you how it disconnects. There's just 2 hooks here. Pull these up, take the whole seat upwards, slide it back out of the front hooks, and then it's free, and I can just pick it up and take it out of the van. Seat belts go with it, so it's all one package. I put it back in, I just slide it until it catches those front hooks, drop it down, and it's in. So there we go, transit seat in the back of a G-Series Chevy. I gained a tiny bit of headroom, but not much by taking the carpet and everything out. This headliner's coming out, and I'm going to put a slightly taller one in, but I may still at some point modify the brackets to drop this seat down 2 inches, because that'll put it on the same height as the front seats. So A, this feels less like stadium seating, and B, if somebody as tall as me is sitting back here, they're not right up on the headliner like I am at the moment. But I'm happy with this project. It's good. Kiddo's going to have a nice safe seat to sit in. It means my van is now a 4-seater instead of a 2-seater, which it felt kind of dumb when it was a 2-seater with this much space. As soon as the weather warms up again, meaning not 7 degrees, I'm going to finish putting sound deadener down on the floor. I ordered some more because I ran out as well. And then as soon as that's in, there was a white foam insulation that Chevy had put there. I'm going to put as much of that back in as I can. It was cut out for the 2 seats and the rear seat, so I'm not going to have a lot of it. But if I can get this sort of secondary passenger compartment floor covered in it, I'll be happy with that. And then the rubber horse mat is going to go on top of that. And I've been looking for a interesting and entertaining, like, Oriental carpet or Persian carpet, cheap on Facebook Marketplace, to use as the carpeting in here, because I think that'll look pretty. Anyway, my hand is freezing holding this camera up, so I'm going to take off. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.